الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
Alhamdulillah, all praise and all thanks is due to Allah. Nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastahdihi wa nastaghfiruh. We praise Him and we thank Him while at the same time begging His guidance and His forgiveness. وَنَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ شُرُورِ أَنفُسِنَا وَمِنْ سَيِّئَاتِ أَعْمَالِنَا. And we seek refuge and protection with Him from the evil of our own souls, from our egos, pride and arrogance, and of course for the evil consequences that those things inevitably lead to. مَنْ يَهْدِهِ اللَّهُ فَلَا مُضِلَّ لَهُ. And of course whoever Allah, the Exalted and Sublime, chooses to guide from His infinite love, His compassion and His mercy, then know for sure, brothers and sisters, فَلَا مُضِلَّ لَهُ. Once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen faith for someone, once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has destined for them Iman, Hidayah, there's nothing, no measure, no harm, nothing you can take away from that person that will ever deter them from the truth. Because that's the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And conversely, وَمَنْ يُضْلِلْ فَلَا هَادِيَ لَهُ. And on the opposite end, whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His justice, out of His divine wisdom, out of something that they have chosen in their own hearts, know for sure that no one can guide that person. No facts, no data, no images, nothing could ever guide that person to what is right, to what is true, to what is clear as day. Wadah wuduh ash-shams, it doesn't matter for that person. فَلَا هَادِيَ لَهُ. There's no one who can guide you. وَأَشْهَدُ أَنْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَحْدَهُ لَا شَرِيكَ لَهُ. And I testify before all of you that there is only one true deity, who is the creator, who is the sustainer, the provider, al-Malik, Malik al-Mulk, Al-Mudabbir, Al-Khaliq, Al-Raziq. And that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as such, because He is the only one who does those things, yani creates from nothing, provides for all beings, that He is the owner of everything that exists, and He is the controller and keeps everything going and takes care of all affairs. As such, He's the only one who deserves to be worshipped. وَهَذَا شَيْءٌ مَنْطِقِي. That is the only logical conclusion that someone can come to. That He is the only one who deserves our prayers, our sacrifices. Any act of worship that we commit belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Him alone. وَأَشْهَدُ أَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا عَبْدُهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. And I further testify that Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, is His servant and final messenger. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ حَقَّ تُقَاتِهِ وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. O you who believe, be fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be mindful of Him, conscious of Him, the fear and consciousness and awareness that He is deserving of you. And don't die. Rather, don't you dare die except in a state of submission to His will, i.e. don't die except as Muslims. يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ اتَّقُوا رَبَّكُمُ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ. O humanity, fear your Lord who created you from a single soul, and that single individual soul being our father Adam. وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا. And then from him Allah created his mate, our mother Eve or Hawa. وَبَثَّ مِنْهُمَا رِجَالًا كَثِيرًا وَنِسَاءً. And then from them both Allah Azza wa Jal populated the earth with many men and women. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ وَالْأَرْحَامِ. And fear your Lord through whom you ask your mutual rights. And never cut the ties of family. Always uphold the ties of kinship. إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلَيْكُمْ رَقِيبًا. Because Allah is always and ever a watch over you and I. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا يُصْلِحْ لَكُمْ أَعْمَالَكُمْ وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ. O you who believe, again, that reminder to be conscious and mindful of Allah, and not only that, but always speak the truth, a straightforward word. Don't beat around the bush. And when you do so, then Allah will repair your deeds. And on top of that, He will forgive you your sins. وَمَنْ يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَقَدْ فَازَ فَوْزًا عَظِيمًا. And of course, whoever obeys Allah and His Messenger have indeed achieved a mighty triumph. As to what follows, my beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, Allah the exalted and sublime, as I've already mentioned, reminds us to be mindful and fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is a part and parcel of what the khutbah is here for. To remind all of us of our duties and our responsibilities. Because in this life we get distracted, in this life we get caught up, in this life there is overtime, in this life there are responsibilities, priorities, and sometimes those priorities get mixed up. Sometimes those priorities become conflated. Sometimes they become in a way that is not according to what is the will and the decree and the want of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so last week, as a part and parcel of discharging that duty of reminding myself and all of you about part of our duty, I stood up here in this member speaking about the ongoing suffering of our brothers and sisters in Palestine and the ongoing genocide, killing, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, whatever political, technical term that you want to use, that it is ongoing and happening. And in spite of how that can be demoralizing, in spite of how challenging and difficult that can have to continue to listen to and watch, as not only us but the entire world continues to watch as it unfolds, there are all too often, every now and then, glimmers of hope, glimmers of motivation, beaming rays of inspiration, and echoes of the prophets and messengers. Echoes from the words of the prophets and the messengers, spanning time, reaching all the way to here on our ears today and now. What do I mean by that, brothers and sisters? From the rubble and the muck and the blood and all of the ugliness and the visceralness, as I mentioned, that we are watching in real time, there are words that we hear. Words that we hear that should inspire every last one of us who are comfortably sitting on this carpet in this room right now. Words of them and their faith. Words of children, men, and women who seemingly have nowhere to go, and yet you still hear words of faith and echoes of prophets and messengers. Let me be more clear about what I mean by that. Let us go back to thousands of years ago, well before Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, well before Isa ﷺ, all the way to Prophet Musa ﷺ. And we know that he was, or rather his people, were being oppressed by Fir'aun. His people were being oppressed by Fir'aun. They were his slaves. He could do whatever he wanted with them. And he did just that. And he said something that the other pharaohs before him had never said. The pharaohs before him, they still honored the gods that the people had at that time and prayed and worshiped to them, and they simply commanded the people to do the same. And then he came and he said what? The Fir'aun that we know of in the Quran, he said what? Ana rabbukumul a'la. He said, I am your God and your Lord. Worship, venerate, honor, sacrifice, pray to me. Ana rabbukumul a'la. I'm your Lord Most High. And all while doing that, he used to do what? يُذَبِّحُونَ أَبْنَاءَهُمْ وَيَسْتَحْيُونَ نِسَاءَهُمْ. And the children of Israel, the people of Moses, he used to kill their sons every other year and slaughter them and leave the women and the daughters alive. Al-Muhim, fast forward through that story, and what happens? Eventually, Musa alayhi salam gets permission and the command from Allah, leave that place. Leave and go somewhere else. And he does so. And he tells the children of Israel, we got to go. We got to leave. In the middle of the night, we have to leave. Only bring, right, what is on your backs. The clothes on your back, nothing else. And they do that. And of course, we know what happens after that. As they went on, under the cover of night, and they're trying to escape, and they're running away, mostly elderly, women, not very many young strapping men, because why? يُذَبِّحُونَ أَبْنَاءَهُمْ. They were killing them. And then subhanAllah, what happens? They come to a place where the Red Sea is in front of them. An entire ocean, they can't cross. There's nowhere to go. And behind them is what? Fir'aun and his army, well equipped with their swords and their shields and their arrows and their daggers and their chariots and their horses and so on and so forth, all the sophistication of the army and the military at that time, the peak of its might. And then they have that behind them and the Red Sea in front of them. And even Bani Israel and those poor, ragged group of people who seemingly have nothing but the clothes on their back and the word of a messenger and a prophet, that's all they have. What do they say? They said, فَلَمَّا تَرَى الْجَمْعَانِ قَالَ أَصْحَابُ مُوسَى إِنَّا لَمُدْرَكُونَ. When they saw the two large, vast groups coming to bear down on them, and then they have this huge body in front of them, they said, Khalas, it's over, we're done. إِنَّا لَمُدْرَكُونَ. We are overcome and overtaken. What does Musa alayhi salam say? What does he say in Surah Shu'ara? قَالَ كَلَّا إِنَّ مَعِيَ رَبِّي سَيَهْدِينِ. He said, ain't no way. Kalla. I don't care what my eyes see. I don't care what my five senses are telling me. I don't care what the rest of the world is telling me. Governments may not be supporting me. The other people who should be supporting me, they might not be there for me. I may not have materials, I may not have weapons, I may not have nothing. My eyes and ears and my senses are telling me there's nothing else. Kalla. Inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdi. My Lord is with me. My Lord is with me, and he's going to show me a way out of this. People might not show me a way out. Governments might not show me a way out. International bodies who are supposed to uphold, quote unquote, justice may not be doing what they're supposed to be doing. But what? Kalla inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdi. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has got my back there. And those are the echoes that I'm talking about. That you hear from the rubble, that you hear from the blood and the muck and the mire. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to learn from history. And for many of us, it's still hard to process. Sitting in our comfortable homes, driving in our cars, that's hard to process. They're supposed to say that? Some people, non-Muslims, being motivated and inspired, saying like, yo, man, I got to become Muslim because there's something that these people have because they hear echoes of Nubuwwah and Risalah, yani echoes of faith and Imam. SubhanAllah. That should inspire us, brothers and sisters. But then, SubhanAllah, also, not only do we hear those lessons, but Bani Israel, that's a part of their history. That's a part of their history. They don't learn their lessons. Not from the ancient traditions of the prophets and messengers, and not even from recent history with the Holocaust, when again, they were being killed and persecuted, just like them. And yet what do they do instead? I would even postulate and put forward they are even worse than Fir'aun. Instead of learning a lesson, they are even worse than Fir'aun. Because Fir'aun, he did what? يُذَبِّحُونَ أَبْنَاءَهُمْ وَيَسْتَحْيُونَ نِسَاءَهُم. He was killing the sons, but he was at least leaving the women. He was at least leaving the women folk alone. And they do what? In today's time? Indiscriminately kill any and everybody. وَعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, نَحْنُ أَحَقُّ بِمُوسَى. We have more right to Musa than they do. Because they don't follow him truly. They don't learn the lessons from him truly. Then we have another category and group of people that we benefit and learn from and should be inspired by. As I mentioned here on this minbar, which was the young brothers and sisters on the college campuses who are protesting, who after all the other people who should have stood up and said something, whether it is our government from our country, because we are citizens here, this is our country. Many of you, I know, you still got your bags packed somewhere tucked away, and you have your retirement plan, you think you're going back home. Many of you are not permanently going back home. This is, khalas, whether you like it or not. You have too many children, you have too many, khalas, this is your home now. This is your home now. Your kids are in college. They are some of even the ones that are protesting. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make them steadfast. Allahumma ameen. Also inspiring and motivating. That the people who are adults, who have degrees, who have experience, not standing up and doing what they're supposed to do, it takes young college people, men and women, who we would say, no experience in life. They haven't done anything. No, they're not CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. What have they accomplished? And I would say, dare say that they are accomplishing so much that the most intelligent of people that we would have thought, that we would have put our trust in, that we were told to petition, that we're told to write to, that we're told to call, that we're told to ask for. But I also stood in this minbar, and I remember saying 7-8 months ago that you should never trust those people anyways. Because history has told us that already. But I digress. There is still inspiration and motivation from those young brothers and sisters. But that's still not the topic of my khutbah today. In us watching, seeing, observing, hearing, not only those atrocities that are happening there, but what's happening in Sudan, what has been happening for more than 7-8 years in Yemen, at the hands of Muslims no less, Allah musta'an, what is happening in China with the Uyghur Muslims, what is happening in India with the oppressive government there, Hindus coming down on the Muslims, and all of the other places where Muslims may be suffering. We sometimes get distracted to the degree that it ends up distracting us from the responsibilities that are right here in front of our noses. The Muslim community, that's right here. The mothers and fathers that are right here. The husbands and wives that are right here. The community that's right here. The children that are right here. The amanah that we have right here. And so that's what the topic of my khutbah is, brothers and sisters, about our community here and not just about there. Because last week I got a call and I was on the phone for an hour and a half about a sister being abused by her husband and being beaten by her husband, to the extent that she had to flee, leave her home, and stay at another sister's house, right, for 3 days. And so this is what my khutbah is about today, brothers and sisters. We have a responsibility there. We have a responsibility to all of our brothers and sisters all over the world, because we're one ummah. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that what? The Muslims, right? Kabunyan. He said we're like one solid structure. And that solid structure supports and is there for and helps in any way that it can one to the other. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. The brothers, or the believers, are nothing but brothers and sisters. A fraternity between us, even if we don't share blood. But we cannot let that make us forget our responsibilities here. So this sister who was struggling and suffering, right, with domestic violence. This is what I want to share with y'all today. Because a part and parcel of my responsibility, right? Number one is to try as best I can in the capacity of an Imam or a Da'i, is to try to help that sister, her family, to work out those things. But it's also to educate and raise awareness. What is the stance of Islam and where does Islam fall on that issue of domestic violence? So first and foremost, brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ, that you have the best of example with multiple emphasis. La, qad, all of these are for emphasis. Linguistics too, were most certainly, most definitely, emphatically, fi Rasulillah, in the messenger of Allah. He himself, in everything that comes from him and everything that emanates from him. His faith, his practices, his worship, his legacy, his values, his character, everything from him is the highest example. Uswatun hasanah. There is no better example. How did he deal with this issue? Did it even occur in his time? Did it even happen in his time? That someone would put their hands on their wife? That someone would abuse their wife, or their women folk, or their children? And the answer comes absolutely. Absolutely, this occurred in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and there are a number of things that he did. First and foremost, one of the things that he would do, there were a group of 70 women who came to the Prophet ﷺ in the middle of the night, and to his wives, complaining to them, going to them and complaining to all of them, saying that our husbands beat us and hit us and put their hands on us. What is the first thing that the Prophet ﷺ did? The first thing he did was to bring the companions, Ridwanullahi alayhim, to the masjid. And the first thing that he did was exhort them and talk to them about the issue. He said that in the middle of the night, women came to Ali Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and they are complaining about their husbands beating them. And the Prophet ﷺ, he exhorted them away from this, that this is not something that they should be doing. And he said that those who do that, they are not the best of you. They are not worthy to be looked up. They're not real men to be doing this. That's one example. Another example, on a communal level, how did the Prophet ﷺ deal with this issue, this matter? In the last large public address that the Prophet ﷺ had, in the Khutbah for the Hajjatul Wada, the farewell Khutbah and the farewell Hajj, more than 100,000 Sahaba more than 100,000 people are there with the Prophet at the Prophet's feet, listening to him. He only had 5 paragraphs, probably the most important khutbah that he ever gave, because he laid down a foundation that would be remembered in perpetuity, well after he's gone. The last public address. And what does he say? اتقوا الله في نسائكم. Fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Be afraid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with regards to your women folk. هن عوان عندكم. They are under your charge and your care. أخذتهن بأمانة الله. You have taken them to be able to deal with them because they're your wife now. You're allowed to be alone with them. There are things that are allowed with them that are not with other women. But it is a trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't forget that. She is not your property. She is not for you to do whatever you want to. Be amanatillah. She is an amana from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you have an amana, that means what? That you will be asked about it on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Everything that happens behind closed doors, in the basement, in the bathroom, in the living room, when you are alone with your family and your wife and you thought nobody was there, وَأَنَا رَبُّ الْبَيْتِ. And seemingly similar to the words of Fir'aun, أَنَا رَبُّكُمُ الْأَعْلَى. I can do whatever I want to here. And actually, when the husband of this particular issue that is, brought me to bring this issue up, when he was taught to, don't get involved, this is none of your business. Don't get involved, this is none of your business. As if to say that's not our sister. As if to say we have no ilaha. As if to say, now that we know our sister is being harmed, we're just supposed to sit there and say, that's none of my business. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us something different. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ. Allah's telling me I got responsibilities to her. How am I supposed to say that's none of my business? Except that he has, I'm not going to say he's worse than Fir'aun, but he has Fir'aunic thinking. That it's my business. I do whatever I want to. And it's none of yours and you ain't got nothing to say to it. And I want you to pay attention. He didn't even deny it. He didn't even have the shame to say, Wallahi, سينتشر بين الناس يقولون أنا أدري يعني زوجتي وعيالي وكذا. حتى هذا. Until that, he didn't even have the shame to say that, like to deny it and lie about it. طيب المهم. Then the Prophet ﷺ, with his own personal family, brothers and sisters, the brothers, if you could please come forward, make room, inshallah. Just the brothers, if you could please make sure to make room. طيب. Moving beyond that, as a last resort, the Prophet ﷺ again had a woman who came and complained. And she said, Ya Rasulullah, my husband is abusing me. My husband is abusing me. And the Prophet ﷺ, he told her, go back to your husband and tell him that you are under the care and the protection of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Tell him that you are under the care of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So she went back and did it. And she was told by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And she came back shortly after that. He said, Ya Rasulullah, it only became worse. He's beating me even more. So the Prophet ﷺ, he took his garments and he ripped off a portion and he gave it to him. And he said, go back to him and you show him this and let him know that you are under the care of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that you're under my protection. And of course, somebody might say, why give her a piece of the garment? Because she could have been lying the first time. She could have been just making it up, just saying whatever she needs to, right, to get away from his abuse. So she just said whatever needs to be said. But now she's bringing, look, no, the Prophet ﷺ, yeah, you know who this is. You know who that garment belongs to. You know what that is. So she went and again she came back and said, Ya Rasulullah, it only got worse. So now what did the Prophet ﷺ do? He raised his blessed, honored hands. And what you would think Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and who he is and everything about him is that, right, that he's a what? Rahmatun lil alameen, that he is a mercy to mankind. Al-insi wal jinn, human beings and jinn and everything else in between. He is a mercy to all of mankind, humanity, the world, the environment, animals. He is a mercy for everyone. But on this particular occasion, he made dua against this person, i.e. a curse. And he said, Ya Allah, oh Allah, alayka bil Walid. Oh Allah, deal with Walid. Oh Allah, he did this 3 times. Oh Allah, take care of him. Oh Allah, it is you to deal with him. I'm invoking you. Al-Qawi, Al-Aziz, Al-Jabbar. I'm calling on you to deal with him, Ya Allah. Anybody who would dare think of raising their hand, abusing their family, hitting their wife, hitting their etc., right? Remember, this is one of the few occasions that the Prophet ﷺ made dua against someone, a curse. And I ask you by Allah, I ask everybody sitting here, the Prophet ﷺ, Khalilullah, the beloved of Allah, the close intimate friend of Allah, is Allah going to reject his dua and say no to him? Hasha lillah. I'm not telling you no. And so anybody who would do that, they would have to contend and contest with. This is how the Prophet ﷺ dealt with it. Then somebody might say, well, come on now, Shaykh. I mean, yeah, Imam. But we have the ayah in Surah An-Nisa. And we all know this ayah. What about that one though? And you say, that's true. That ayah is there. And there's all kinds of discussion, debate, and argument about what does that mean, its reality, etc., which is beyond the scope of Khutbah, and you got to go back to work, and y'all got stuff you got to do. But I would tell you this. When Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha was asked about the character of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what did she say? Khuluquhu al-Qur'an. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he himself was a walking, talking embodiment of the Qur'an. Khuluquhu al-Qur'an. He was a walking embodiment of the Qur'an. And also the same wife who said that in Sahih Muslim, when she was asked about the Prophet ﷺ and his demeanor and his character and how he got down with his family in his household, she said he never raised his hand against his wives. He never raised his hands against his children. He never raised his hands against his servants. Except fi sabilillah. Except that he fought against the enemies of Allah in the cause of Allah, for the sake of Allah, fi sabilillah. That's the only time. Anas ibn Malik, who was a servant of the Prophet ﷺ for 10 years, from the time that he was 10 years old until he was 20 years old. He was a servant. I.e., what is the benefit of knowing that is how close and intimate, right, that he would know who the real Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is. Because you know that sometimes there's people, they come to the masjid, or they're outside at work, and in public, they have one face. They're very nice and jovial and easygoing. Son, how you doing, brother? Matter of fact, if you were to ask the people sometimes in the community, like, yo, what do you think about this brother? Man, he's one of the best of us. And then when they go home, then there's somebody different. It's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That there's somebody completely different when it comes to their family. Wa'iyadu billah. And so, subhanAllah, brothers and sisters, the Prophet ﷺ, this was not his way. This is not what he taught. So then, again, speaking on that same point about that ayah, I wonder if any man who would engage in that type of behavior, of harming his family and dealing with his family in that manner, do you think he's going to go and check that ayah in the Quran first? And then look at the tafsir and be like, okay, this is what it is, and have some type of academic or for the sake of Allah, fi sabilillah, and then he's going to be, all right, now I can because that's what Allah told me to do. Or is it the other way around? because of something inside themselves, because of who they are, their character, their manners, their upbringing, who they are. And then they try to go to the Quran to justify. And they try to use Islam like a billy club to bludgeon people with it whenever it suits them. To the extent that the Prophet ﷺ, and this is the last thing I'll say about this particular part, the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions, how is it? And he's asking in a way of how does this even make sense? That someone could beat their wives like an animal. And then at the same time, that same night, still go to her and look for intimacy and closeness. How could somebody do that? That doesn't even compute or make sense by any measure. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. I say what I say first and foremost for myself and then for all of you, and I beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's forgiveness, and I exhort and I remind all of you to do the same. Indeed, He is the all forgiving and the especially merciful. الحمد لله وحده وكفاه وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد عليه الصلاة والتسليم ثم أما بعد. My beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, as I mentioned before sitting down, domestic violence is something that for sure it occurs and it happens. And unfortunately it occurs more than we like to admit, or more than we like to think. But it occurs, brothers and sisters. And I'm not talking about kuffar, because it happens from them, of course. I'm talking about the Muslims and in our community. It happens. Matter of fact, you might know somebody. You might have heard of a cousin. You might have heard of a relative. You might have heard of a brother. It might have been somebody that you know. So no doubt we know that. But it must be talked about, and it must be aired out in order for us to be able to deal with it and handle it. And now I know I keep mentioning men abusing their wives. And no doubt for sure, brothers and sisters, there are women who abuse their husbands. That is for sure. And all the different types and ways of abuse, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, whether it is spiritual, whether it is verbal, there are men. And there are women who do the same. However, more often than not, it is men who perpetrate it. So make no mistake, I am not here to say that there are only men who do this. There are women who do it as well. And that does not mean that it's okay for anybody to do. So then, what do we mean there's different types? So obviously we know about the physical, and that's what usually jumps to people's mind in the first place. But then you have verbal abuse. And this was even mentioned in the Quran, or alluded to in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قد سمع الله قول التي تجادلك في زوجها وتشتكي إلى الله والله يسمع تحاوركما. And so you look at this. A Sahabiya, she came to the Prophet ﷺ complaining about the verbal abuse of her husband. And he was saying something that was vile and repulsive and unbefitting to say. And of course, he was saying this in anger, which may happen, which may occur. Anger, problems, arguing, that is going to occur. But there is still someone you are answerable to and accountable to. And what he said was so unbefitting of the believer that Allah Azza wa Jalla responded. That Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala said something about it. And so that means what? Even verbally, there isn't supposed to be abuse between a husband and a wife. And similarly, you have this from wives. Disrespecting their husbands. Not obeying their husbands. Not letting them lead the household. Contending, fighting with, pushing, disrespecting. That is a type of abuse. And I want you to consider this, brothers and sisters. What will happen to this household? How will they show up? Because it's not just the man who might be experiencing abuse. He's not going to be the only victim. Or the woman who's experiencing that abuse. She's not going to be the only victim. Those people oftentimes are going to have what? Children. And how confusing is that? Your father, to see him, who you look up to, respect, etc. And then someone you love and cherish, and then he's beating on her. Her screaming, her whatever. Or vice versa. The mother screaming, yelling, throwing things at her husband, and the kids are there trying to process that. How are that whole family unit, what are they going to show up like in the community? How will the husband be? And the effects that will have on him. Because whoever is doing the abuse, they are also tainting their own souls. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it when they make a sin, which of course this is, when you're making a sin, you're hurting your own self as well. How is he going to show up in the community? That sister. She's going to feel more isolated. That's Abe. Who can I talk to? Who can I explain to? That's going to be, people are going to say something. And yes, he's doing this to me, but he's still my husband. We got the kids. What are we supposed to do? Etc., etc. So she's going to feel more and more isolated, possibly withdrawn. How's she going to be helping, volunteering, spiritually uplifted, be a participant in the community? And then the children as well. What will that do to them? Not only emotionally, mentally, even spiritually. Wallahi ayyuhal ikhwa. Even just also in the same this past week, I came across a young man who said, I'm no longer Muslim, I'm Christian. His father called him, sat down and talked to him. And the father, when he was explaining to me what was happening and some of the things that he think pushed his son to this, he said he saw me and my wife for 2.5 years fighting and arguing. Ugly battles. The father's explaining this to me. And he said, I feel like this is part and parcel what caused my son to withdraw. And then when he withdrew from the family, that's when he started looking for other places, for solace, for comfort, for community, for care, for answers. And that's where he found it. There are deep repercussions, brothers and sisters. But time doesn't allow that I continue on with this, so I have to close with a few things. Okay, then what we gonna do? For those who may be victims, if you hear this, first and foremost, I go all the way back to the beginning of my khutbah. When Musa alayhi salam, what he said. And in that terrible, seemingly no way out, back against the wall between a rock and a hard place situation, what did he say? Kalla inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdin. That know for sure, sister or brother, whoever might be suffering through this, know that Allah is with you and He will give you a way out. This is number one. Number two, do not let anyone tell you, starting first and foremost with me or anyone else, to tell you to be patient with some man punching you, kicking you, hitting you, and be patient. That is not what the Deen of Islam tells us. Not like this. Sister, if it need be, alhamdulillah, I myself, right, am part and parcel of this masjid. You can call here. You can call the administration of this masjid. You can call myself, and we will help you in any capacity and way that we can. And there are numerous resources in our community that are there to avail those who might be struggling with this. And we can make those available for you. And if you feel like there's nothing else, and you feel like your life is threatened, if you feel like it's too dangerous, etc., I'm telling you from this minbar, call the police. Call the police, because we have to acknowledge and admit, we have no sulta. We have no, can we go and arrest the brother? Can we go and physically stop him? We don't have that. We're not in a Muslim country. Then what you going to do? Call the police. Hasha lillah, that we would ever be in a situation where we get that terrible call and then we don't say nothing or do anything, and then 2 days later you hear on the news, sister was killed. or children were killed, which, by the way, happens in the Muslim community. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect this community. But that happens. Not too long ago in Chicago, a man killed his entire family, his wife and his kids. Why? Because he said they was disrespecting him. Play, that's for the victim, that you don't have to go through that alone. We're here to help. We're here to do what we can for you. Secondly, are for those who may be bystanders. You might hear about it. Like I said, it might be a family. It might be somebody that you know. Do not put our communal considerations, like what are they going to say about us, it's aid, etc. Don't worry about that. If you do the right thing, that's all you need to worry about, which is why we should draw inspiration from those young college students. Because people are telling them what? You ain't going to get no job. You ain't going to we're going to make sure that you get kicked out of college. We're going to make sure you have no future. And yet, many of them, they still do what? They still stay. Because they know that it's what? Because it's the right thing to do. And those are college students. If you're a grown man, if you're a grown woman, and you're a real man or a real woman, then you should have that much more reason to do the right thing. If you're really a believer, in kuntum tu'minuna billahi wal yawmil akhir. As the Prophet ﷺ commands, man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi. Then the person who may be perpetrating this, whoever they might be, know that Allah, or the Prophet ﷺ, made dua and curse against those people that are oppressing their families. They're supposed to be taking care of them, looking after them. That's what you're supposed to be doing. Helping them, being a rock for them, not abusing them. And then, brothers and sisters, lastly I say, we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the mighty and majestic and the sublime, that He sends peace and blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his pure family, upon his youth companions, and all those who follow from the righteousness until the last day. Ya Allah, we ask you to alleviate the suffering and the difficulties of our brothers and sisters in Philistine and in Sudan and all over the Muslim world where they might be suffering. Oh Allah, we ask you that give aid and help those who are the vulnerable in our community. May you support them and aid them and grant them a way out from their injustice and their oppression. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Oh Allah, we ask you to show us the truth for what it is. Grant us the strength, the courage, and the sincerity to follow it, to stand up for it, and to fight for it, and defend for it when necessary. Ya Rabbil Alameen. And we also ask you to show us falsehood for what it is. And grant us the strength, the courage, and the sincerity to fight against it, to stand up and fight against it when necessary. Ya Rabbil Alameen, and call others away from it. Allah, اللهم آت نفوسنا تقواها وزكيها أنت خير من زكاها وأنت وليها ومولاها يا رب العالمين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه، اللهم أرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. عباد الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. اذكروا الله يذكركم واشكروه على نعمه يزدكم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون. وأقيموا الصلاة. So I tell you the soul support.